The Club of Rome, I would like to go back really into the Club of Rome and take you to 1768. 200 years before the Club of Rome was founded, the Lunar Society of Birmingham was founded. And the Lunar Society of Birmingham had some 3 incredible members. That included William Small, who was no one else less than the tutor of Thomas Jefferson. That included Erasmus Darwin, who was, of course, the grandfather of Charles Darwin, but he was a very well-known poet and a medic. And it included Matthew Boulton, who actually was the partner, the financier of Mr. Watt, Thomas Watt. And they got together on the Monday closest to full moon. Because when it was full moon, they could walk home after dinner using the light of the moon. And they were considered so strange by society that today we still call these kind of people lunatics. So the word lunatics comes from this club of 3 who started gathering about 40 people together. And these 3 people were at the nexus of the American independence by tutoring Thomas Jefferson, the French Revolution, and the Industrial Revolution. 200 years later, exactly 200 years later, in 1968, there are 3 men getting together again. Watch out for the next meeting, in 2168. But what is very important is, and I'm insisting, having been so privileged to be with Aurelio during 6 years of his life, that Aurelio's mind of bringing people together, and we can't go through the whole history, the time doesn't allow it me, but the meeting with Alexander King on one hand, who was a bureaucrat, who had served at the embassy of the United States, of the embassy of England, of the United Kingdom in the United States during the war, and German Gvisciani, who had learned to know in the negotiations for the creation of the first large foreign car manufacturing in the Soviet Union. Don't ever forget, please, German Gvisciani, because without him the club would not have happened. And I know we kind of like to forget the Soviet Union and the USSR, but he was very instrumental in creating bridges. In 1968, the club decided it was going to do, and I quote, "study the predicament of humanity in complex and an uncertain world." And the statutes of the Club of Rome state that they will examine long-term impact of accelerating change. That was the opening statement of the club. It was, in the language of the club at the time, not only the have-not, but the know-not. And I think one of the greatest challenges we have today is we still have so many people ignorant about the reality. But this was stated by them then. Solidarity, in the first writings in 68 by Aurelio, says it's a rare commodity. We need to have an abundance of solidarity instead of the rarity that it had become. And at the core of the club, I must say, in these original years, was a deep, I would even say, a blind trust in each other. They were so well tuned into each other that they knew that even without talking, and anyway, there was no cell phone and there was no internet. But without talking, they knew they were in harmony and going for common initiatives with impatience. They had an incredible diversity in the network, and it was a network. The Club of Rome was only incorporated in 71, ladies and gentlemen. And that was in Switzerland because there was a check of $250,000 coming from the Volkswagen Foundation. And they had to hurry up to find a place to put it into a bank account. That's the reason why they got into the formalities. They were very action-oriented. The club was not at all a center of study. It was individual action, it was innovative, and at the time, rather innovatively, the club was very multilateral. The club positioned itself as the champion in perceiving the interwoven realities of the world. It was a catalyst for frontier ideas. The club didn't care if there was a scientific reference, if there was a footnote. Is the idea potentially a catalyst? Then we would go for it. It's a promoter of innovation, institutional innovations, a pioneer in research, which we have, of course, with Jorgen, an extraordinary member amongst us. But it had the responsibility to identify new crucial issues when they appear and make these known. That is one of the key roles. Personally advised heads of state, and it undertook bold initiatives. Bold initiatives is the word that I've been using the last few days, but it is in the text of the 68, 69, and 70. We can't just take initiatives that are wishy-washy and agreed by everyone. We need to take the bold ones. And particularly, the Club of Rome stated that it had to initiate particular projects in fields where the bureaucracy slowed down or even blocked the decision-making. Basically, they were calling for a revolution. Basically, we're saying, if our ideas are not accepted quickly by the bureaucracies around the world, we'll just go ahead and do it ourselves. And ladies and gentlemen, that came along with massive media and public awareness. When Aurelio had to leave office at Italconsult, there were hundreds of cases of newspaper clippings that were discarded. Hundreds of cases. The media loved, very much loved, the Club of Rome. At the 25th anniversary in 93, it decided to change the word from problématique to résolutique. Instead of having this complexity of the problems, you need to now look at the complexity of the solutions. The résolutique had 5 very clear guidelines in 1993. First, bring solutions. Second, bring ethical values. Third, transform learning. And environment and development was part of it, and the government was part of it. But I would like to just remind you that the top number 3 is get things done with values and ensure that the educational framework around it can follow. The man behind it is Aurelio. I mean, anyone who had the privilege and the pleasure of spending time with him was captivated by and the charm and the intellect and the capacity to enroll and enlist people. But mind you, his PhD was out about the first 5-year plan of Lenin. Let me just give you a little bit of context. And he was the deputy manager of the first warplane factory of a consortium of Italian companies with the support of Mussolini, of course, in China. And when Mussolini decided to line himself with Japan, then, of course, the Chinese couldn't continue, and the Japanese actually invaded and bombed and destroyed the factory that he had built. And somehow Aurelio succeeded in negotiating with Mrs. Chiang Kai-shek the full payment for the factory. He traveled with a plane over 17 days from Nanjing all the way to Torino with pockets full of money and handed over to the Fiat management the cash that he had gotten paid by the Chinese. He became, of course, and he was responsible for the special projects division at Fiat. That meant he had a great freedom to act. And during the Second World War, Aurelio was in the underground movement, and Aurelio risked his life to bring pilots through the Piemontese mountains to safety in Switzerland. That earned him an amazing friendship and appreciation from even Republicans in the United States, like Senator Jacob Javits of New York. This capacity to relate to, on one hand, the communists in the USSR and the Republicans in the United States. There are very few people who have that capacity. For Aurelio, it became a bit difficult in Italy with his positions, and of course his extraordinary intelligence and capacity to get things done made him not so welcome somewhere. And as a result, he decided with Valletta, the power man of Fiat at the time, to go to Argentina. In 1964, Fiat in Argentina was as big as Fiat in Turin. He went through drama with Oberdan Sallustro. And what I think is important, if you just bear with me, why I'm telling you this, is because it gives you the context on how it was possible that Aurelio had this amazing network of contacts. He argued with the communist guerrilla in Argentina to free Oberdan, but he failed. Pietro Savoretti became his front man in the Soviet Union. German Gvisciani got him going, and here is the first real impact of the club. In parallel to the creation of the club, Aurelio and German Gvisciani were very busy with Lord Zuckerman and George Bundy in order to create IASA. I don't have to tell you what IASA is. But it was so key to know that even before the club started, those negotiations were already ongoing. The East-West Center for New Initiatives, based in Vienna, was a platform that permitted to channel ideas between East and West in the Cold War. It was funded by the Fiat family. The Accademia dei Lincei, the meeting that was organized in '68, was also funded by the family Agnelli. We should know that there is a deep relation between Aurelio. But there were other people around, like Erich Jansch, who didn't stay around. Erich was an incredible knowledgeable about opera. And Erich wrote this book, which Aurelio actually got 2 chapters out of that book into management schools. The self-organizing universe, totally against. Edward Pestel is the one who got him the money. But Edward Pestel was also the one who was fiercely critical of the report of the first world model that was created. Bob Havrelichin was the host in Switzerland, and he is the one who has actually facilitated a lot of the logistics in the original time. But the one who opened the bank account was Hugo Thiemann, and he was the head of the Battelle Institute, and he had the signature. And Eleonora Massini, you were there. Eleonora, you know, it was the only woman at the time, but there was a woman around. And she was very strong in her influence with Aurelio. Jay Forrester made a big impact on Aurelio, but Aurelio had this innate resistance to the mathematical modeling. Dennis, who had just come from his holidays, 6 months of holidays in Asia, was called by Jay Forrester to host Aurelio and these guys coming from something called the Club of Rome. He became in charge of it. And of course, Jorgen joined. And then they had this computer output, which was basically rejected intellectually and emotionally by Aurelio. But there was Donella, who translated these 1,000 pages of computer outputs in an incredible prosa. Ladies and gentlemen, the most impactful report of the Club of Rome was a computer output with prosa. Could we just remember it was not thoroughly researched with footnotes and scientific references and peer group reviews. It was just done because the message was strong. Now here I'm putting on you 2 pictures, and I'm sorry, in the airport is stuck 3 original copies. I have an original copy for the mayor of Rome because I think the Library of Rome should have the original copy of Limits to Growth.
Absolutely.
And when I learned that Jorgen only has a falling apart piece, he gets another copy. But I would like you to show the humanity of Aurelio in the club at the time, which created a lot of debate inside the club. Some people fiercely disliked how Aurelio was the dictator and got things done. But here is a detail. Look at the prices. Aurelio negotiated all the time with the publishers that the price of the book has to be lower. So he got after the publisher when the price was more than $2 and pressed upon them that he would make the volume so they could put the price at less than $2. Ladies and gentlemen, this was the micromanagement the club was involved in. Get the book as cheap as possible. And it's not 3 million, it is at least 6 million. Now here is the matrix of Aurelio and the Club of Rome at the time. First of all, Raymond Barre. It is quite amazing that Raymond Barre got the reports of the Club of Rome as vice president beforehand. Enrico Mansold got it as well. And the two got off into a heated debate before the report was published. And Klaus Schwab, who was the assistant professor to Bob Haverlition in Geneva, organized the European Economic Forum. And he needed to have a great speaker, and it turned out to be Aurelio, Raymond Barre, and Enrico Mansold. The World Economic Forum was born. Ladies and gentlemen, the first meeting of the World Economic Forum, then European Forum, was the Club of Rome. And then there was this incredible journalist, Willem Oltmans in the Netherlands, who went out to interview people. He interviewed 150 people around the world, including the Secretary General of the United Nations, including Indira Gandhi. He interviewed all of them and asked them, have you read the report to the Club of Rome? Ladies and gentlemen, you don't need Twitter and Facebook. You need people talking to people. And when people talk to people, it goes fast. Indira Gandhi became so excited about it. She wanted to meet Aurelio. Of course, Her Majesty the Queen Beatrix and her mother Juliana all got so keen, and they thought it was about time the Dutch got more involved in the content. So when Jan Tinbergen got the first Nobel Prize, he immediately got a budget to write a report to the Club of Rome about reshaping the international order. And there was this incredible Austrian Chancellor, Bruno Kreisky, who, I would say, if it wasn't love, it was definitely very platonic, but Aurelio and Bruno, they liked each other. And whatever Aurelio had in his mind, Bruno would do it. And I can tell you that this meeting, which is probably one of the most prominent meetings the Club of Rome did, was bringing together 9 heads of state in Salzburg to debate. Exactly as you were saying, Sandrine, let's bring together these cities. Well, Aurelio was bringing together the heads of state. Of course, he needed to have someone to pay the bill. And Bruno Kreisky paid the bill. But Bruno Kreisky's budget was not good enough for that because it was in Salzburg. So the governor of Salzburg, Hasselauer, footed the other half of the bill. And ladies and gentlemen, being in Rome and in the Vatican, I must speak about Cardinal Franz König. Aurelio always stated that he was agnostic. And the Club of Rome was not going to get into religion. But I have been witness of meetings organized in Vienna, again with the help of Bruno, whereby the cardinals of the Vatican were meeting with the Communist Party of the Soviet Union to agree on how to let the cardinals and the bishops in the Soviet Union in the underground do their work. And I was at the meeting and the discussion was, are we going to give the mafia of the Russians and the Soviets the power, or are we going to get values to the people? And the church with Cardinal König, Aurelio, was the mediator of this meeting. We have to talk about some of the bad people that were involved as well, like Robert Maxwell, who plundered the pension fund, but he was the publisher of the Club of Rome. Maurice Guernier, who secured the network in Africa. Il était l'inspecteur des finances in France. That means he had access to every every African president. Houphouet-Boigny was one of the great supporters of the club. 3 meetings of the club were held in Ivory Coast. Enrique Iglesias, the president of first CEPAL and then of the Inter-American Development Bank. Belisario Betancur, the president of Colombia, where the last trip of Aurelio took place, mobilized with Paulo Lugari this incredible project. The largest project of solar power installed in social housing still today was initiated at a Club of Rome meeting in Bogota. Ladies and gentlemen, 76,000 units of solar power manufactured in Colombia, were installed. The decision was made at the Club of Rome meeting. And the first decision to regenerate the rainforest, Las Gaviotas, this is where I made the last trip with Aurelio. 60 members of the Club of Rome joined, and everyone looked at this project and said, it's crazy. How can you regenerate a forest? Ladies and gentlemen, the forest stands today. In Japan, it was Saburo Okita with Eisaku Sato who got the Nobel Prize. He was the one who committed to the non-nuclear proliferation. And Sato, when he got the Nobel Prize, said, we have to do something in Japan. And Aurelio said, it's the United Nations University. $100 million donation from Japanese. And that was a meeting with Okita and Aurelio. Get down to education. Sujat Moko was the second rector. Heitor Gorgolino, the third. The fourth, Konrad Osterwalder. Ladies and gentlemen, third, second, and fourth were all members of the Club of Rome. That sounds like a takeover. Abdel Salam al-Majali, who was the president of the Arab Thought Forum, was the chairman of the board of the United Nations University. Ladies and gentlemen, we had UNESCO, Federico Mayor, Karl-Göran Hedén, who created MIRSEN. This incredible network of biology was a product of the Club of Rome. Lester Brown, I met with Lester Brown together with Aurelio in Rio the first time. They got together and Aurelio said, I need you to publish every year because we are not fast enough with our books. And then we cannot forget to talk about Umberto Colombo. To conclude, Umberto was the vice president of Aurelio, very impressed. He was chairman of ENI for a year. He was the chairman of ENEA, the big research institute, and an incredible hard-working man. And one day Umberto Colombo contacted me and said, I have to introduce you to a lady. And I thought, Umberto introducing me to a lady? It was Catia Bastioli. And we met. And it was an amazing relationship because I'm very privileged to serve on the board of Novamont, where there is really a transformation taking place on how you look at chemistry and stranded acids. We cannot forget another lady in the Club of Rome, Elisabeth Mann-Borgese, because George Livanos, when he, with the Niarchos family and the Onassis family, wanted to clean up the shipping industry, they mobilized Helmepa, the Hellenic Marine Protection Environment. Ladies and gentlemen, for that one day of work for Aurelio, of pulling everyone together, George paid $75,000 in '82. That went to the Forum Humanum, a project that the Club of Rome didn't want to fund. This was Aurelio. He will get his way. Daniel Janssen, who got Aurelio into the Bilderberg in the Trilateral Commission. Ilya Prigozhin, who put him into the Nobles. Helio Jaguaribe from Brazil. Let's not forget how important Helio was in the whole social impact. And ladies and gentlemen, the No Limits to Learning, which was such an impactful report. Many ministries were created around the world, but one of them is quite amazing in Venezuela. Alberto Machado, after reading the report, No Limits to Learning, created the Ministry for Intelligence Development. El derecho de ser inteligente, the right to be intelligent. The last initiative that I'm mentioning is, of course, Desertec. The club has been very engaged in getting things done. Now, I've only mentioned to you 12 initiatives. For the sake of time, I have not mentioned another 64 I have on the list. The Club of Rome had impact. I hope it's getting its act together to continue having it by thinking and by doing. And therefore, put into reality a quote that Aurelio gave when he was in Las Gaviotas, Colombia, on his last trip, and it says, can you read it? La madurez consiste en realizar sus sueños. You will realize maturity in life when you have achieved your dreams. Thank you.